Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD. Before we begin today's story, let me ask you something gentle. When was the last time you held someone who was shaking with fear? Some hugs don't heal the pain. But sometimes, they're just enough to remind someone they're not alone in it. If you believe that sometimes a simple hug at the right moment can change an entire little soul, then please, give this video a like and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Here we share stories that heal, every single week. The pediatric neurology waiting room at Cedars-Sinai Hospital was unusually quiet that Sunday morning. Cold fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across plastic chairs and white tile floors. Outside the wide windows, Los Angeles moved slowly, cloudy skies, empty streets, the kind of day that felt like holding your breath. In the far corner of the waiting room, a small boy curled up behind a chair. His knees were pulled tightly to his chest, hands pressed hard over his ears, eyes shut like he was trying to block out the world. Jude was 7 years old, and this was his third neurological scan this month. He hadn't spoken since the first one. Mr. Malcolm Westwood, billionaire founder of a biotech empire, stood just a few feet away, powerless. He was used to solving problems with logic and precision. With Jude, none of that worked. His son was terrified of hospitals, especially the harsh white light. No matter how many specialists he brought in, no matter how many devices he funded or innovations he created, none of it could stop his little boy from trembling at the sight of a white coat. A nurse crouched beside Jude with a gentle voice, offering a bright red toy car. But the boy lashed out, swatting it from her hand. It hit the floor with a sharp crack. Then came the scream, high, raw, and heartbreaking. Everyone in the waiting room flinched. Malcolm stepped forward instinctively, but stopped. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to reach through that fear. Then, from the hallway, a figure paused. Natalie Burns had just finished a morning shift at the hospital cafeteria. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, apron folded over her arm, hands still smelling faintly of dish soap and coffee. She heard the scream, saw the boy, and saw the man standing frozen in a tailored navy suit. She didn't ask permission. She didn't speak. Natalie walked quietly into the waiting room, past the stunned nurse, past Malcolm's confused stare. She sat down on the cold tile floor a few feet from Jude. Not facing him, not crowding him, just close enough for him to notice. She tucked her legs beneath her, rested her hands in her lap, and let the silence settle. It wasn't performative. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of stillness only someone who had once been that scared could offer. Minutes passed. 1. Then 2. Then 4. Jude peeked out from behind the chair. His breathing slowed. His small eyes flicked toward her face. Natalie didn't smile, didn't speak. She just slowly opened her arms. Not wide, not demanding. Just enough to ask a question, without words. Do you need a little warmth right now? And then, with a barely there nod, Jude uncurled. He crawled across the tile, shaky and slow. When he reached her, he didn't hesitate. He climbed into her lap, tucked his head under her chin, and exhaled like he had been holding his breath for days. Malcolm didn't move. He couldn't. He was watching something that, in all his years and all his money, he'd never witnessed before. It was the first time Jude had let anyone touch him in a hospital without breaking down. And the person holding him was a stranger who hadn't said a single word. The next day, Natalie returned to her usual station behind the stainless steel counter of the hospital cafeteria. It was quieter than most days, mid-afternoon lull, just before the evening shift began. She was restocking the napkin dispensers when she noticed the envelope. It wasn't addressed, not formally. Just a single folded piece of ivory paper resting beside the sugar packets. She glanced around. No one was near enough to have left it by accident. She opened it slowly, her hands still slightly damp from washing dishes. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, heavy with hesitation. My son has never hugged anyone in a hospital before. If you have time. I'd like to buy you lunch, and ask how you did it. M.W. Natalie read it twice. She didn't need the initials to know who had written it. She hesitated. Part of her, the quiet, guarded part that had learned to stay behind the scenes, told her to leave it alone. She was just a cafeteria waitress. She wasn't a therapist or a specialist. She didn't have answers. But there had been something in that man's eyes yesterday. Not pride. Not power. Just pure, naked confusion. A father, unarmed in the face of his own child's fear. So when her shift ended, she walked out the side door down the hallway, and found Malcolm Westwood waiting near the staff garden courtyard, tie loosened, jacket folded over one arm, looking out of place and unsure of himself. He saw her and straightened. Didn't smile. Just nodded once, silently relieved. "I hope this wasn't inappropriate," he said as they walked toward the hospital cafe that served actual food, not reheated trays. I didn't know who else to ask." She didn't answer right away. Only after they'd ordered him a black coffee and roasted turkey sandwich, her just soup, did she finally look at him fully. "You could have asked a doctor," she said gently. He nodded. "I've asked dozens. And they always talk about interventions or prescriptions. But no one ever taught me how to sit beside my son without making him flinch." Natalie stirred her soup. "I'm good at fixing things," he continued. "Cells. Genes. Biotech. I've built a company that can repair the building blocks of life." He exhaled. "But I can't figure out how to keep my son from being afraid of me." His voice didn't tremble. He wasn't the type to cry in public. But there was something raw in the way he gripped his coffee cup, a man who had finally reached a point where wealth, intellect, and status couldn't close the distance between two people. Natalie didn't rush to respond. She didn't give him platitudes. "I don't think you're the problem," she said after a long silence. "But I do think he sees fear on your face. And when kids see fear in the people who are supposed to protect them, they panic." He looked at her, searching. "But I'm not afraid of him." She nodded. "You're afraid of doing it wrong." He didn't argue. She set her spoon down. "When I was little," she said, "I spent 2 years afraid of everything. Panic attacks. Bright lights. Sudden sounds. My mother used to hold me so tight, I thought I'd break. And that only made it worse." She looked up at him. "But there was one nurse. She never touched me unless I asked. She'd just sit nearby. Read her book. Hum. Breathe slowly. I used to think she was magic." Malcolm leaned forward, elbows on the table. "So what you did yesterday wasn't instinct?" "It was memory," she said softly. "And maybe a little faith." He nodded. Slowly. Gratefully. "I don't want to intrude," he said, "but would you consider spending a little more time with Jude? Not as a professional. Just as someone who remembers." Natalie didn't smile. But her eyes softened. "I'm not a solution," she warned. "No," he said. "But you're something my son didn't know he needed." She folded her hands in her lap and gave a quiet nod. "I'll come by after my shifts. I won't stay long. And I won't expect anything." "That's more than enough," he replied. And for the first time in a long while, Malcolm Westwood left a conversation not with answers, but with hope. Natalie never arrived empty-handed. Each time she walked into the pediatric neurology wing, she carried something small, something quiet. A set of pastel markers in a zippered pouch. A soft blue knitted scarf folded neatly under one arm. A pair of white headphones that looked too big for a child's ears but fit just right over Jude's head when the world became too loud. She didn't knock when she entered the playroom near the imaging labs. Jude was usually already there, seated on the rug in the corner, surrounded by toy blocks and paper that remained untouched, until she came. Their first afternoon together, she sat beside him and placed a coloring book between them. But not just any coloring book, this one was blank. Hand-drawn outlines, done by Natalie herself, of hospitals that didn't look like hospitals at all. Rooms with jelly bean-shaped beds, stethoscopes shaped like rainbows, nurses that looked like cheerful cats wearing pastel hats. Jude stared for a long time. Then he picked up a green marker. By the end of that first hour, he'd drawn an entire wing of what he called the Friendly Doctor Club, complete with bubble machines in every hallway and a vending machine that only gave out hugs. Natalie said nothing about the accuracy. She simply added a giraffe with a clipboard and smiled when he laughed. As the days passed, their world grew. Each morning before her shift, Natalie brought something new, a sheet of blank stickers, a soft cloth to sit on, a different color scarf. She taught him how to breathe through his belly using a game she called invisible bubble blowing. He'd puff his cheeks and exhale slowly, pretending to make bubbles float up to the ceiling tiles. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Sometimes they colored in silence, with just the hum of the fluorescent lights above and the occasional echo of a distant intercom. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't protocol. It was presence. And Jude, once terrified of the white walls, began to sit more upright. He began to uncurl. 2 weeks into their quiet routine, something changed. The MRI appointment that had always sent him into a panic, the one he'd refused 4 times before, was scheduled again. This time, Jude didn't cry. He looked at Natalie, clutching his marker-stained hands, and asked only one thing, "Will you come with me?" She didn't hesitate. Of course. When they arrived at the imaging suite, the technician looked surprised to see Jude walking calmly beside the waitress with the soft eyes and wool scarf. Jude stopped just before the door and pulled something from his pocket. A sticker, hand-drawn that morning. It was shaped like a superhero badge, with tiny words written in blocky, uneven letters. Dr. Brave. He peeled the back off and stuck it on the technician's white coat with solemn ceremony. The tech looked at Natalie, eyebrows raised. She only shrugged and whispered, "He made it for you." Then Jude climbed onto the padded MRI table, put on the headphones Natalie brought, and lay perfectly still. Malcolm watched through the glass from the observation room. He hadn't said much over the past few days. He'd been letting them build something he wasn't sure how to enter. But now, watching his son giggle as he pointed at the rainbow sticker on the tech's lapel, something shifted. Jude was still inside a hospital. Still beneath the humming white lights. Still surrounded by machines and strangers in scrubs. But he wasn't afraid. And when he looked up and caught Malcolm's eyes through the glass, he smiled. It was small. It was brief. But it was the first smile his father had ever seen from him inside these walls. The drawing was taped to the playroom wall with a crooked strip of blue painter's tape. It was simple, just crayon figures, drawn with the unsteady hand of a 7-year-old. For people stood under a cartoon sun. Each one had a name scribbled beneath in bright, careful letters. Natalie, Dr. Lisa, Mr. Wiggles, and a blank space where a 4th person might have been. Malcolm stood in the doorway, holding a file he no longer cared to read. He stared at the drawing longer than he should have, his eyes pausing on each smiling face. Natalie, with her wool scarf and kind eyes, was drawn tallest. Dr. Lisa had her signature bun and glasses. Mr. Wiggles, the stuffed dog Jude carried everywhere, had oversized ears and a heart on his chest. Malcolm was nowhere to be seen. He took a quiet breath and stepped back into the hallway before anyone noticed. His hand gripped the doorframe for just a second longer, and then he let go. Later that evening, he sat in the back row of the pediatric auditorium, where the staff held weekly briefing sessions. But he didn't hear the presentation. His mind played back every moment of the last 3 weeks, the afternoons Natalie spent with Jude, the way the boy leaned into her without hesitation, the way he laughed at her silly giraffe jokes and reached for her hand during the walk to radiology. There was a softness between them, one Malcolm couldn't manufacture, one that didn't come from effort or money or planning. It just existed, like air. Like music only certain hearts could hear. And though he was grateful, truly, he also felt something bitter crawling into his chest. That night, Malcolm didn't review Jude's treatment schedule like he usually did. He simply forwarded it to the head nurse and added a short message. Please coordinate directly with Ms. Burns moving forward. She seems to understand him better than I do. He clicked send before he could regret it. The next morning, he skipped the usual hospital visit altogether. Instead, he met with a board of investors downtown, then sat through 2 hours of financial projections, only to realize halfway through that he hadn't retained a word. He ordered lunch, didn't eat it. Tried to read the latest study on neuroassociative plasticity in children, put it down after 3 pages. By afternoon, he found himself parked outside the hospital anyway. But he didn't go in. He just sat there, engine idling, watching parents walk in and out with balloons, coffee cups, paperwork clutched to their chests like armor. He watched a nurse stoop to tie a little girl's shoe, and a volunteer hand out stickers by the elevator. And all he could think was, they belong here. I don't. At home that night, he poured himself a scotch, just one, and stood in front of a framed photo on the mantel. It was from Jude's 3rd birthday. The boy had frosting on his cheek and was clutching a plastic dinosaur. Malcolm had been smiling, but even in the photo, there was a gap. Jude wasn't looking at him. He was looking off to the side, toward something, someone else. Malcolm set the glass down untouched. He didn't cry. That wasn't his way. But the heaviness settled in quietly, like dust over something once loved and now forgotten. Maybe I'm just not soft enough, he thought. Not warm enough. Maybe Jude sees something in me I never wanted anyone to see. The next day, when the nurse asked if he'd like to join the play session again, he shook his head politely. Let Natalie take the lead, he said. He's better when I'm not there. No one argued. And that made it worse. Because now, Malcolm wasn't just watching from the sidelines. He had taken himself out of the game completely. The change had been sudden, one of those small administrative shifts that ripple into something bigger without warning. Dr. Lisa, Jude's usual pediatric neurologist, had been called into emergency surgery. Another specialist was filling in, and the appointment had been moved to a different wing of the hospital. No one thought it would matter. But for Jude, it did. He arrived holding Natalie's scarf, his fingers twisting the fabric into nervous knots. But Natalie wasn't there. A gas leak in the cafeteria had forced a temporary closure, and she was caught in the back hallway, waiting for clearance from the safety team. The moment Jude stepped into the unfamiliar room, brighter lights, different chairs, the absence of his usual doctor, his breath hitched. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes darted wildly around the space. Then, panic. It rose in him like a wave, faster than the nurses could react, deeper than any of them could calm. He screamed. High and sharp and desperate. He dropped the scarf. Threw off the headphones. Kicked the waiting chair until it tipped. Where's Miss Natalie? He cried, his voice cracking between gasps. I need Miss Natalie. I need her. A nurse tried to step forward, but he shrieked and backed into the corner, pressing his body against the wall like he could disappear into it. Another nurse called down the hall for help, her voice tight with urgency. The technician fumbled with the lights, dimming them, but it was too late. Jude was spiraling. In the chaos, Malcolm stood frozen near the door. He had come only to observe, no intentions, no expectations. But now, every fiber of his being trembled. He wanted to run to his son. But he remembered all the times he'd tried before, and Jude had pulled away. Still, something had changed. Malcolm didn't know what it was. Maybe the drawing, maybe the absence, maybe the ache that hadn't left his chest for days. But he took one shaky breath. And stepped forward. His shoes echoed on the tile. He crouched slowly, level with his son, who was curled into himself on the floor, rocking slightly, whispering Natalie's name through tears. Malcolm's voice came out softer than he knew he could speak. Jude, he said gently, I know I'm not who you asked for, The boy didn't look up. Malcolm swallowed. "But I'm here. And if you let me, I can try to help. Not like Natalie does. Not perfectly." His hand hovered midair, unsure. "But maybe, just this once, could I be the one to hold you?" Silence. Only the hum of the MRI machine down the hall, and the faint sob still trembling in Jude's throat. Then, a nod. So small, so subtle, Malcolm almost missed it. But then Jude's hands moved, unclenching, reaching. And before either of them could think, the boy threw himself forward, burying his face into Malcolm's chest. Malcolm caught him. His arms wrapped around the small shaking body as instinctively as breathing. And to his surprise, Jude didn't stiffen. Didn't pull away. He sank into the embrace, fully, completely, trustingly. It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a miracle. It was a moment. A quiet, shattering, beautiful moment. There were no tears. No screams. Just the sound of a father holding his son, and the slow, uneven rhythm of breath sinking between them. Malcolm closed his eyes, his cheek resting gently on Jude's hair. And for the first time since his boy was born, he didn't feel like a spectator in his own child's life. He felt needed. Present. Enough. When the nurses stepped back, giving them space, no one said a word. No one dared interrupt what had just taken years to happen. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. And as Jude's sobs softened into breaths, Malcolm whispered into his ear, barely audible, almost afraid to break the stillness. "I'm here, son. I'm not going anywhere." 3 months later, the waiting room at Cedars-Sinai didn't look the same. The white walls were still there. So were the flickering overhead lights and the stiff-backed plastic chairs. But something about the space had shifted. There were softer colors now, murals painted by local artists, beanbag chairs tucked in corners, soft music humming through hidden speakers. More importantly, there were people. Not doctors or nurses, but trained volunteers. Former patients. Artists. Therapists who didn't wear scrubs. People who knew what it felt like to be scared in a place where everyone expected you to be brave. They called it the Waiting Room Project. It was Malcolm's idea. But it was Natalie who gave it life. Together, they built a program that placed compassionate support staff in pediatric waiting areas. People trained not to diagnose or fix, but to sit, listen, and be present. It was a model of empathy, of stillness, of learning to recognize fear not as a problem but as a language. And on the morning of its first official launch, the hospital atrium was filled with quiet anticipation. Rows of folding chairs were lined up facing a small platform. On it stood a podium, a backdrop of soft pastels, and a banner with hand-lettered words, "You don't have to be brave alone." Natalie stood to the side of the stage, dressed simply, her hair tied back. Next to her was Jude, buttoned-up shirt, hands fidgeting at his sides, but no fear in his eyes. Just focus. Malcolm sat in the front row, legs crossed, arms resting loosely in his lap. He didn't wear a tie that day. He didn't bring notes. The room quieted. And then Jude stepped forward. He climbed the small steps without help. Stood behind the podium. Adjusted the microphone with both hands. He looked so small up there. But when he spoke, his voice, though soft, carried to every corner. "I used to be scared of this hospital," he said, eyes fixed ahead. "I used to think the white lights meant something bad was going to happen." He paused, fingers tapping the edge of the podium. "But then, someone sat down next to me. They didn't ask questions. They didn't try to fix me. They just waited. Until I wasn't scared alone." The audience was still, nurses, parents, volunteers, even a few doctors leaning forward, holding their breath. Jude looked toward Natalie, then to his father. "I don't think hospitals will ever be fun," he added with a small smile. "But now I know, if I ever get scared again, someone will sit with me. And wait. And maybe open their arms." just in case I need a hug." There were tears in more than a few eyes by then. Malcolm didn't cry. But he stood as the applause began, walking toward the stage. He didn't rush. Just moved with quiet purpose, meeting his son at the steps. He didn't scoop him up. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out and took Jude's hand, gently without pressure. And this time, Jude didn't flinch. He held on. Malcolm looked at the crowd, then back at his son. And in that moment, he wasn't a billionaire, or a biotech genius, or even the man who'd once stood helpless outside an MRI room. He was just a father, holding his son's hand. Not too tight. Not too loose. Just warm enough. If you believe that a hug, given at just the right moment, can change the course of a child's entire childhood, please leave a like on this video and don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more heartwarming stories every week. Thank you for staying with us till the end. We'll see you next time.